No cat, at least in this universe, was harmed during the filming. Even though you're the one paying the rent, you're living in his place. Idle and dreamy, they wear themselves out being lazy with no energy at all. And paradoxically, even though they spend their days doing nothing, that creature could very well destroy a good part of the Earth. Because as lazy as it is, this furball contains an enormous amount of energy that's just not in the right form. This fascinating discovery made at the beginning of the last century is summed up in the famous equation E equals mc2, which tells us that what we call matter is actually just energy in a different form. And vice versa. Let's take a few seconds to pause and consider the mind-blowing significance of this discovery by putting it another way. In nature, in the universe we live in, the energy trapped in an object at rest is equal to its mass multiplied by the speed of light squared. And this strange equality has surprising implications. So, the amount of potential energy contained in, let's say, 5 kilos of inactive feline matter, which is obtained by multiplying that mass by the speed of light squared, is extraordinary. On the order of 9x10 to the power of 17 joules. And this amount of energy applies to anything and everything, as long as the object in question has a somewhat significant mass. In this calculation, specifically 5 kilobi. A value that probably doesn't mean much to you, but that we can translate into units of Krakatoa, named after the most powerful volcanic eruption of the modern era, and which released a phenomenal amount of energy, yet still 6 times less than what is currently contained in its larval mass state. Subtitles by Jeremy Diaz. So, if so many of us live alongside such dormant volcanoes, isn't there a way to try to harness all that energy? In fact, to convert and release all the power inside it with 100% efficiency, your cat would somehow have to be the opposite of itself, in other words, an anti-cat. That is, a cat made up of 5 kigus of antimatter, a form of matter that might sound exotic to you, but is actually not something straight out of a science fiction novel. Because antimatter can form for brief moments in nature, and we even know how to produce it in the laboratory. In fact, subatomic particles of antimatter are exactly identical in mass to those that make up everything in our world, except that they have properties opposite to the matter we know. And what if, as if by magic, your cat was turned into an anti-cat? If even the smallest particle making it up were instantly changed into antiparticles, then this anti-cat would, on paper, be a perfect and strictly identical copy of the original. And for the first billionth of a second after its arrival, nothing would happen. The same phlegmatic furball, the same apathetic mass. And then, almost instantly, things would start to go seriously wrong. Because this anti-cat, arriving in a universe made of matter, would start to react violently, almost instantly, go completely crazy. Or, more precisely, according to E equals mc squared to annihilate, at the subatomic level and gradually nearby matter. And it doesn't matter whether it's air, the couch, or your mother-in-law's lap where the anti-cat was placed. In any case, when particles and antiparticles with opposite properties are present together, they would simply annihilate each other, turning the sum of their combined mass into energy. This would occur in a series of explosive reactions with painfully surprising consequences. Because for every mere gram annihilated, the amount of energy released would be about the same as that produced by the explosion of 42,000 tons of TNT. This is on the same scale as the Hiroshima bomb. A fraction of a second later, once the process is complete, the world would literally be 10 kilograms lighter. 5 kilograms of feline antimatter and ordinary matter would have permanently left the universe, having been converted with 100% efficiency into energy. This rapid weight loss would leave behind a gaping hole where your home and even your entire district used to be. So, by bringing home, for the sake of the experiment, 5 kilograms of a charming anti-ball of fur, you would have turned the world for miles around into an apocalyptic scene. Fortunately, we live in a universe made of matter, so you'll never have an anti-cat. By the way, let's note that if your anti-cat had been kept away from all normal matter by a hypothetical magnetic field, or even better, placed in an anti-world entirely made of antimatter with an anti-you, none of this would have happened. And that's true even though we know how to make antimatter. It even seems easy on paper, although it's very complicated in reality. To do this, you have to create violent collisions between particles in order to convert some of their energy into matter and antimatter. And above all, you have to quickly confine the latter because, as you've probably guessed, it has the annoying tendency to react violently with, well, just about anything and everything. In fact, if you could right now gather all the antimatter ever produced by CERN at the tip of your finger, the reactions wouldn't release more energy than a lit match. And above all, since you have to spend more energy to produce antimatter than you get back by putting it anywhere, we're not about to use it as an energy source anytime soon. But despite all that, it is possible, with efficiencies much lower than 100%, to turn the larval mass of your cat into energy. You might be tempted to toss it into a nuclear reactor core, where the fission processes turn part of the mass of heavy uranium nuclei into energy with a conversion rate of 0.08%. Unfortunately, no cat contains pure uranium, but I have something better to suggest. Because if you could, as if by magic and maybe also a bit out of sadism, teleport your 5-kilogram cat directly into the core of the sun, then a part of its mass would be annihilated with energy conversion rates of about 0.7%. Which is much more efficient than those of our nuclear fission power plants. Cats are about the best you can get within relatively easy reach in the universe. Once in the core of the star, 3.5 grams of feline matter heated to 15 million degrees would be completely annihilated, releasing an amount of energy equivalent to that released by the explosion of 500,000 tons of TNT. Enough, if we could harness it, to power a country like Togo with electricity for a year. These 3.5 grams may seem strangely small to you compared to the total mass of the cat. But at the center of the sun, the temperature isn't high enough to fuse atoms heavier than hydrogen. In other words, this 0.7% efficiency only applies to the roughly 500 grams of hydrogen atoms found in it. And when heated to nearly 15 million degrees, they will be transformed into 496.5 grams of helium, with the rest becoming energy. By the way, from that point of view, it's funny to think that it would be more profitable to teleport 5 kilos of water there, and that not a single gram of matter would be annihilated if we sent pure granite instead. Because this rock doesn't contain hydrogen, and its atoms require much more extreme conditions than those found at the core of our star in order to fuse. So it would do nothing there except get incredibly hot. Now, if like me, you think your hypothetical cat deserves a more efficient, but perhaps also more tragic end than this, rest assured, because there is a way in nature to increase the mass-to-energy conversion rate from 0.7% to nearly 42%. For that, nothing could be simpler. Find a supermassive black hole that's spinning, around which an accretion disk has formed. A thick, opaque torus, made incandescent by the intense acceleration of the siphoned matter, wraps around the hole in a spiraling, accelerated motion. And that's it. There you go. It's ready. All you have to do now is toss your cat toward the swirling disk of matter. You should soon witness, in an end-of-the-world spectacle, the conversion of 42% of the matter that made up your late kitty into energy. Because when the matter making up the accretion disk, moving at speeds of around 120,000 kilometers, comes into contact with that of your pet, the latter will leave it behind. And, through the violence of continuous friction, be transformed into a plasma soup heated to infernal temperatures of several billion degrees. And in doing so, 2.1 kg of feline matter will be converted into a considerable amount of X-rays and gamma rays, with the rest feeding the disk. And it's amusing to think that it's because of these staggering rates of mass-to-energy conversion that the total luminosity of the plasma soup surrounding these black holes can exceed that of our sun by several million times. In short, every overweight cat lounging on your couch and in whose home you live is basically a ball of energy that's just not in the right form, and that's still pretty huge. I'm still paying the electricity bills while he eats for free.